Good morning. So today we start industrial and organizational psychology. So I love this class. And if you guys have never seen the show Billions, I highly recommend it. I think that they portray industrial and organizational psychology so well in that program. I mean, it's Wendy. Wendy is the IO, basically, psychologist. She's a medical doctor in the show, but she plays the role. And you really see she works at like this hedge fund, high stress, high productivity, validation needs, like all the things that we talk about. You see that in that show. So even if you just see the first episode, it's actually where I got the name for my podcast, Mistress of the Subconscious, was from that show. So I really, really like industrial org. And one of the programs that Kaiser University offers actually is an industrial organizational psychology track just at the master's level, just in IO. So today we're going to talk about, IO in terms of, I'm going to give you some historical perspective from an archetypal standpoint and stuff like that. But the whole month, we're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about goals in terms of using work as a space for not only material goals like work goals, but also spiritual and mental health goals. So regardless if you want to be an IO psychologist, this will help you if you work, and we all work, right? So you get something out of this, yes. Industrial organizational. So it has to do, it's a great question, has to do with the work environment. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So that's why I use that example of Billions, because she's in the workplace helping people during stressful situations in the workplace. Because the mind doesn't shut down just because you go to work. You bring yourself with you. So your unmet needs, your value system, your low-level consciousness, all the stuff that we've talked about, your mother and father, you drag all of that to your job. And to think that you don't, right, would be silly. So that's what we're going to sort of deconstruct this month. So I've got a lot to cover today on the board, and I just really love this topic. So today I'm calling this lecture Dethroning Sacred Spaces, okay? And the reason I'm dethroning sacred spaces is because we don't oftentimes think that work is a sacred space, but it's where we spend most of our time. To think that it's not sacred and that we can't do spiritual or mental health work in the environment where we spend most of our time, that would be kind of like a strange perspective. Yet we don't tend to think of work as a sacred space. I'm going to teach you about something called liminal spaces. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how tribal societies used to do work and spirit and play and family all. And now that we're more agrarian society, we sort of isolate or separate or segregate work and spirit. And my attempt is, whether you become an IO psychologist like Wendy and work in that sort of space helping others, or you just bring this knowledge to your work environment, how important it is. So we're going to cover the law of rhythm and the law of cause and effect. The law of rhythm states that everything has a season, everything has a cycle. If you've ever read the Bible, in Psalms, and there's a famous song, for every season, turn, turn, turn. That's all actually from the Psalms, and everything has a season. And I'm going to talk to you about your work season, the time of productivity in your life. That is very, very important. People identify a lot of their self-worth linked to their productivity, to their paycheck, to their status. So we can't assume this doesn't have a spiritual component or mental health component. The other thing is the cause and effect. Cause and effect is the law of karma. Okay, so the law of cause and effect states that every action has an equal reaction. We're going to talk about why you are in your particular workspace and what there is to do there. So quite a bit of mythology, but the mythology during the month is going to be really rooted in Saturn, which is also known as Kronos. Which is funny because we just changed over our clock-in system, and it's called Kronos. And we don't realize so many things in our culture and our society are mythological. But work is chronos, chronological. I have to get to work on time. It's inherent in the myth. The Avengers? I haven't seen that, but I wouldn't doubt it. All of Marvel. Well, all of the Marvel and comics, it's all mythology. Okay, so. Okay, so that's all mythology. I saw Cruella the other day. Wasn't it so good? My girlfriend saw it and she's like, what myth was that? I'm like, oh, Hephaestus Hera. One of many, but that was like, so everything we're watching is myth. And I have a hashtag that I say no new stories. That's why with your client, when you can identify their story, then you can really sort of help them unravel. And work holds a really important sort of story for us. So we want to know what we're doing in our workspace. This is not insignificant or irrelevant from our spiritual space. That's why it's dethroning sacred spaces. So I want to start with Saturn. Okay, so first I want you to see the symbol. It looks like a cross, it looks like an H. I think of it as like a real estate sign stuck in the ground, okay? It's actually the cross, and Saturn is the cross that we bear. And most people would say that their work is like a cross, a burden. I'll get to some stats that I got from some what's it called, some of the literature on workplace philosophy or environment or stresses and stuff like that. I'll share that with you in a bit. So in mythology, Saturn was dethroned. This is extremely important. Saturn is the archetype, and I don't have my archetype poster. I have to bring it from the car. Saturn is the archetype that is the authority, that is the boundary, that is the king, that is stability, that gives us limits, right? All the things we don't like. And I'm going to explain why. I'm going to link it to your childhood, why work is sort of a place that you're like, oh, get me out of here, and when's the weekend, okay? But it starts with the mythology or the archetype of Saturn, and that's the glyph or the symbol. And we will talk about astrology a bit today because it's important to know all of this is tied together and the bigger picture of why we work. That's my hope. So he was dethroned. In the word dethrone, there is a sense of competition, getting back on top. And what do most people want? They want to climb the ladder of success, or they don't like the CEO or the authority or the boss. This morning I had a client and she's like, oh, my boss, she's toxic, she's wicked, she doesn't know what she's doing. On, and you know where I come in and say, well, what we judge is what we are, right? So judgments are confessions and they're great. And I'm like, that is why you are in this relationship with that boss, because it's mirroring to you, okay? So there's a sense of hierarchy, there's a sense of climbing the ladder because Saturn was dethroned, and Saturn rules the workplace. Saturn also rules limits. Saturn also rules ambition, the paycheck. Saturn also rules Chronos is another way to say Saturn, another name. The time clock that we're all watching. So this is a very, very important archetype. Therefore, work is a sacred space, and I'll explain a bit why. Another thing that Saturn represents in an archetype is grief, melancholy, depression, winning, limits, and boundaries. And we will talk about competition versus play at the psyche level. Saturn is known as the karmic taskmaster. When I told you that when you are conceived, you are castrated, it's because Saturn castrated Uranus, his father. So he castrates us with a body, with limits, with boundaries, with money, with earthly responsibilities the minute that we're conceived. And he is the one that gives us our karma. He says, that's why it's a law of cause and effect. Here's your karma for this lifetime. This is what you come to do. And you're working towards that. Literally, you're burning karma at work with these people that are helping you learn flexibility and boundaries and limits that we're going to talk about. There's actually a path of yoga called karma yoga. And it simply means action. And it's when you go and pull the weeds, or if you go and help with service. And we're going to talk about the sixth house in astrology, that is work, health, illness, service. That is also linked to Jesus. So we're going to talk about all of these archetypes. He is considered the one that sets boundaries. He's considered the closet cleaner. The things that no longer serve you, I told you the purpose of life is to learn how to die, is all the domain of Saturn. And the place this happens day in and day out is at work. Do not think that you're not at work for some really cosmic reason, because you are. It's funny because people will say to me, Francis, I want to do what you do. Or I want to leave my job to do spiritual work, to be like a spiritual counselor. And I'm like, your work is your most sacred space. Your work is your most spiritual space. That's where you have a spiritual STD. You learn to say, think, and do. You speak up for yourself. You voice. You know, it's also a place where you learn humility. Big spiritual lesson. So to think that we have to leave our 9 to 5 to do spirit work, and that's why I'm saying it's a dethroning of sacred spaces. You're not leaving your job to go to a sacred church or temple on the weekend, and that's more sacred than your job. It's just not. And the ancients, and I have on the board, the tribal societies knew that it was all integrated. And that's my hope for this month, to sort of bring you back to that. It's called trial and denial, Saturn, because we keep doing the same day over and over and over again. Do you know that the most spiritual movie is Groundhog Day? And you guys are young. Have you seen that with Bill Murray? Every day he does the same day over and over and over again. You would say that. That's why work is called the daily grind. Over and over and over again. The same thing, the same teachers, the same meetings, the same people, the same lunch hour. It's a trial and denial. You're here in a workspace to get tried, to get out of denial. That's one of the things that Saturn does, is leads us to grief. And I told you that grief is when we use something until it no longer is purposeful. Anyone want to guess how long a Saturn cycle is? 30 years. Most people have 30 years of productivity, 30-year mortgage. This is part of our daily life, our earthly world language. It's not separate from spirit. Your productivity, you start around 30, you retire around 60. I know that's changing, obviously, but I'm saying that is the typical norm. There's a reason. Those are your years where you deconstruct your valor years, your values, meet your spiritual family, all the things that I've taught you. Your work environment is so supremely important to teach you humility and all these spiritual lessons, and realize what you really value. A lot of times it's that you need validation needs, that you need your boss to stroke you. You need a paycheck to say you're worthy, all the things you learn. Then you retire and you dedicate yourself to your spirit. No, I'm here to teach you that you don't have to waste 30 years of productivity, and at work, you can be the most spiritual, meeting spirit and matter at its finest. Yes.
There's something more and beyond the thought that just doesn't want me to do that job. That's just pushing me and pushing me out of that job.
Well, you're probably there to see something. And I use that word intentionally because I know that you're in optometry, ophthalmology. So there's probably something that you're not seeing. And I hope that this month, when and today I'll touch on some things, when you can start using, like I did with my client today, the boss to mirror, then you'll be able to leave and then really go serve your divine will. Okay, but that's your inner voice speaking. So we'll talk more about that. Your judgments are confessions and they're great. What you judge in another is what you're judging in self.
Well, I just asked myself if it's school.
Well, we can deconstruct that, but kind of let me just get through the lecture and then we'll use some examples because that's a good one. Saturn is also teaching you that you misuse your resources. I've told you that time, money, and resources, aka energy, is your currency of self-worth. So if Saturn is here to teach you through your job, through authority, through a schedule, through your money, that you're using your resources incorrectly, then you're going to learn a big spiritual lesson. Saturn is also smart. Is also wise, not smart. I've told you that we do a lot of things with our head, but unless we learn them with our heart. So I was talking to this client this morning, and he's like, I really need to apply this. I really need to get wise. I can't keep repeating the same thing over and over again. That's what we do. We Groundhog Day it, and we don't ever really understand the lesson from our heart. So it's one of the goals of work and the goals of Saturn. Saturn, known as Chronos. Chronos means time. Time holds us accountable. Time, or Chronos, slows us down, bends us to be flexible. One of the reasons it's the cross we bear is because we've got to soften our rigidity. We've got to soften the truth, quote unquote, that we think we have. That's false. All truths are half truths, the law says. We have to become more supple. Anyone want to guess what Saturn body part rules? No, the knees. It brings you to your knees. How often are you humbled or humiliated at work? It brings you to your knees. Things in your life that bring you to your knees are to teach you humility, to bend, to soft, to be supple, to be flexible. And there's no better sacred space than our work environment. Humility is the name of the game. And I'm going to talk to you about competition, and I'm going to give you some questions to ask clients in session. Saturn is the only planet that makes us refined. And I'm using this word intentionally. From an archetype, Saturn is snobby, Saturn is ambitious, Saturn is quality, not quantity. The goat that rules Capricorn, and Capricorn is the sign that's ruled by Saturn, only eats the really good fruit at the tippy top of the tree. The part of you that's snobby, that wants the Prada purse, that wants the fancy restaurants, that's your archetype of Saturn, climbing the ladder of success, seeing that a Prada purse or a fancy restaurant is what gives you self-worth. Part of this is to realize you are worthy independent of those things, but it's definitely what refines us. In spirituality, there's a thing called alchemy. It's like a branch of spirituality. Alchemy is taking lead, plomo, you and a heavy brick, and refining and refining and refining and taking you to gold. That's why you work. That's why you're in the same environment day in and day out. It is your refinement process. Saturn, or Chronos, also rules old age. So when I give you the spiritual adulting map and I tell you you're castrated, Saturn, at the moment of conception, at 0 to 7, you have your origin story. At 14, you get away from your parents for your values. At 21, you identify your sexual pleasures or financial strategies. At 28, you castrate yourself. These are all Saturn cycles. As you get older and older and older, you get more refined. Yes, you could speed up the spiritual adulting process. It is true, and we're in the age of Aquarius, and we will. But the reality is you need some time under your belt to see cycles. One round of Groundhog Day isn't going to make you have the aha. The client this morning was like, I can't keep doing this. This is my 3rd round of marriage. We just need lived experience. And that's what Saturn says. So I want to share this myth that I absolutely love. It's the myth of Phaeton. Phaeton is the son of Apollo, the sun god. So Apollo is the sun, and we are the sun. We are God. I told you we're narcissists. We're the fire. We're the third chakra. We are the sun in our solar system, in our chart. We should be the center of our life. So Apollo has these horses, this chariot. It takes the sun across the sky every day, every day. So Phaeton discovers, as most demigods do, that he's half mortal, half God. Okay? And what do we want to do? We want to meet the God parent. All of us do. That's why we're so anxious to get back to the universal consciousness, to meet the God. That's why we seek intuition and things like that. So Phaeton discovers that his father's Apollo and his father is the sun god. He's like, I got to meet this guy. It's my dad. So he goes to meet Apollo, and Apollo promises Phaeton one wish, anything he wants. And what do you think Phaeton asks for? He asks to drive the chariot that carries the sun in the sky every day. And Apollo says, oh, no, no, no. You're too young. You can't control the horses. You don't know what you're doing. And his son is like, you promised. And Apollo, knowing this was not good because his son was too young, didn't have the capacity to take the sun and put it in the sky, gave him the reins of the chariot anyway. And what happened? Phaeton takes the sun, the chariot, crashes into Earth, and sets the Earth on fire. The reason your parents cannot give you at 14 the reins of your value system is because you're too young. You don't know your power. Besides, they castrate and they don't want you to feed and fly and they don't want to be dethroned and all that. It's also because you don't know yet. A lot of times people are turned down for promotions because they don't have enough experience, even though they could do the job. We need experience, lived experience. We just do. And it's part and parcel of our spiritual growth. So when Phaeton crashes the sun and the chariot into the earth and it causes a big fire, that's what we tend to do in our life sometimes. And we crash and burn, we crash and burn, we crash and burn, just like Bill Murray. And then we finally, like the client this morning, oh, I maybe should do it differently. And that's what Saturn aims to teach us, that there's a different way to do it. It bends, it makes us supple. Humility, oh, that wasn't the right way. So that's part of the lived experience. But we want to crash and burn at times because we think that we can do it. The point is to be the solar system, the sun in your solar system, the sun in your chart, to be the spiritual STD. The spiritual STD is say, think, and do. Be the sun in the sky that you are. Own your power. But you can't get there at 12. You can't get there at 14. You're just not enough yet, or you don't know that you're enough. You're always enough from the moment of conception, but you haven't had enough lived experience. As you get older and with the Saturn help, that's why Saturn takes your lead, heavy self, my truth, I know everything, your rigidity, softens you up to then make you the brilliant sun that you are. So these processes take some time. Now, we think it's a competition. This is a big problem. We think things are competitive. We think that we can lose and win. You can win and lose in your earthly world, in your body. You cannot win in your spiritual life. There's no winning. There's no end point. So we're going to equate competition I have on the board to earth, and we're going to equate spirituality, the soul, to play. And there's no better place to learn to work and play than work. It's part of why the tribal societies did it all in one. You need to go slow. Saturn time, Chronos, slows you down. Your fire is too strong. You know it, I know it. We're all narcissists. I told you that last week. So if you don't have a container and you just want to burn everything up like Phaeton, you're going to crash and burn, and you're going to get sick, which is just a manifestation of how strong your fire is and that you don't want to be contained. So we need authority, we need limits, we need boundaries so that we can slowly develop the fire. We need age, time, and years. That's the limitation that's in the psyche. That people call it freedom, and they want to blow up their life and leave their kids and their mortgage and their wife. It's nothing to do with that. It's the fact that you're obligated to a clock, that you're obligated to time and years before you can become the perfect ripe fruit. Hence the law of rhythm for every season, turn. And I'm going to talk about the equinoxes and the solstices. Age is needed to grow spiritually. That's why I call the Saturn years, the skinny cow years, valor years and nemesis years. This is when you learn your real values. This is when you learn that your nemesis you think is against you, but is actually in your favor, which is your bosses. All of those bosses are to teach you what you're not and that you're more than that. So you want to use that, but you don't want to pilfer the opportunity or waste the opportunity to learn from those people. So don't get out of a job before it's time that you've learned the lesson. I'll talk about that. Saturn's rule, as I said, is 30 years. Your productivity, AKA supposedly, are 30 years. In the ancient scriptures in the Vedas, you needed desire, you needed productivity, you needed your family. And then at 60, a derivative of 30 times 2, then you would go check into the ashram and do your spiritual work. And I'm saying that model has ended. Gurdjieff, I love, he's like, it's the fourth way. Work is in your daily life. I was talking to my brother yesterday. I said, all things are spiritual. All moments, every earthly moment is spiritual. We learn that because we grew up in a cult. And my parents were the financial arm of the spiritual center. So I, from conception, learned spirit and matter always together. I don't struggle with that. And I was telling that to my brother yesterday. It's inherent in our story that spirit and matter are always together. That's why churches raise money. You can't separate. So if you're making money, that's an opportunity to be spiritual. These are the lessons that we have to do, but we've always been taught it's the ashram, the monastery, the mosque, the temple. And it's not. So when people say to me, oh, I want to go do a retreat. Okay, you're doing that because you want to go do a retreat. You want a vacation. I don't care if the retreat's in Las Vegas or it's in the sacred Stonehenge. Your spirituality is your day-to-day. That's why the 6th house in astrology is your day-to-day life. It's Jesus, it's service, it's work, and it's health. This is it. This is my spirituality right here with you in this classroom. It's not somewhere I'm going later. It's not beyond this. But we've always wanted to think that I have to go be spiritual. No, work is the opportunity. The holy is the day-to-day. Your work, your relationships, your boss, the day-to-day grind, as it's called, is your holy sacred space. There's no sacred space. I will talk about liminal spaces and thin spaces momentarily. Why don't we like to go to work? Anyone want to venture? As a general consensus, we'd rather stay home. Yesterday was a day off. We all loved it. I'm going to tell you why. What is the first unmet need? Safety, security. Does anyone know why we have no safety and security? Why we all have safety? Remember, all of the needs we all have. Love is the biggest. No one was loved unconditionally. Safety, security, protection, and validation. You never knew what was going to set your parents off. You never knew. You get an A, they could have said, why not an A+? You never knew. No one wants clarity. No one wants boundaries. We view it in our psyche as limits. Every single thing that I write has a rule book. Because I had no rules. I had rules, but I never really knew what they were. My mom would be like, you could go out with that guy, I like him till midnight. Oh no, this guy I don't like, you have to be home at 10. The co-leader would say something. My mom would say something else. My dad was the structure. We all grew up confused. So I was editing The Truth is in the Triangle book this week, and I was, clarifying some things for the editor. And it's like, when we talk about sugar babies and sugar daddies, you know what the obligation is, right? He's going to pay my rent and I'm going to give him sex. When you get a prenuptial, when you have a prenuptial, you know exactly what the negotiation is. And the origin of relationships is a business arrangement. I have 5 horses, 5 cows, you have 5 cows. Let's get together to protect our assets. And so with the invention of love, and there's a great myth of Tristan and Isolde, and she drinks a potion and they fall in love. We think that love in our modern day romantic scenario and in our parents' scenario has no clarity. The only place in your life, other than if you see me as a client, in which I give you a rule book and go, nope, we're making clear 48 to 52, limitation 0 to 100. We're defining the needs. The only thing that's clear is your job. From day one, here's your handbook. Here's your manual. These are the rules. You come in late, you get written up. You call out sick, you don't get paid. Clarity. And we say that that isn't sacred. We say that's not a sacred space. That's the most sacred space. The most sacred space. So we really have to get clear on what we really want and what we say we want. So one of the things that I did in my own spiritual life was write these books and rule books and boundaries and limits. And it's what I give clients. And if you look to the work model, it's perfect. It's the most sacred space because it gives you boundaries, it gives you limits, it gives you rules, gives you structure. And you get paid. Can spirit and matter ever be separated? No. So this is the misnomer about it. The other reason we don't like work is because it forces us to adult. If adulting is defining the need, if adulting is, in my model, having a philosophy, if adulting is a rule book, and that's given to you the minute you sign up for a job, you're being told adult. Nowhere else in your life are you adulting. You're a big fat baby trying to get your needs met 24/7. You do that at work too. Nobody's showing up as an adult at work. Do not think. But at least the boundary is there trying to help you through your bosses, your authority figures, your paycheck, your schedule, the time clock to help you adult. That's all I did. I said, okay, if work has the structure and it works, we have expectations. I know when I'm going to get fired. I know when I'm going to get accolades. I know when I'm going to get promotion. Let me bring it to spirit and the mind. That's all I did. And when you work the model, it's very clear. And in the truth is in the triangle, it's all about renegotiation. Well, you renegotiate your contract at work, either when you quit and you get a new one, a new job, or you renegotiate your contract after the year, the 2 years, or the 5 years, or whatever. Every time you get your review, you're renegotiating. That's all I did in Truth is in the Triangle. I took those principles. In 7 Gates, I brought it to the individual, and Truth is in the Triangle, I brought it to relationships, and Dethroning Olympus, I brought it to the family, because it works. If we work it, it works for us, but we don't like to adult. Clarity, check this out. Clarity feels restrictive. Clarity feels restrictive. You say you want safety. You say you want to know the rules. You don't. They tell you go 75 miles an hour and you go 80. And what do you say at a dinner party? Oh, no cop gives you a ticket at 80. They'll give you a ticket on 85. And you're shocked if you get a ticket at 80. Anywhere there is clarity, anywhere there's authority, anywhere there's a limit, you are having a hissy fit. We don't want clarity. It's a lie. So today, my client, I'm telling her, oh, you're this, this, and this. She's like, oh my God, you're so right. I go, yeah, I know. That's the way the psyche works. We say we want clarity. No, we don't. In my relationship model, because it's love, it seems very like prescriptive. Tell me what need you're going to fulfill for me. Tell me what your non-negotiable is. Tell me exactly where you're going to be and what you're going to do and how you're going to spend our money. That doesn't seem romantic. That's not jump off the chandelier sexy. That is safe. We don't want safe. That's romantic to you, never knowing, just like your parents. Trying to figure out the person, read my mind. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Safety feels scary. It feels like we aren't loved, but funny enough, work, if we're really using the definition of love, is the most place that we are most loved. It's where our needs are actually met. It's where we have rules. But since we didn't have rules as children, don't get me wrong, you might have a very authoritarian structure. Your father might have looked at you and you knew exactly what he was saying, the look that kills. That doesn't mean you got clarity. Don't kid yourself. It feels restricting. So I want to talk a little bit about the sixth house and Chiron. We've talked at length about Chiron, and I'm not going to go into the whole pituitary and the whole master. We did all that. And Maria, you might want to go to my YouTube and watch those lectures, but I'm going to kind of give just pieces here. Chiron is the ruler of the sixth house. The sixth house is service, work, day-to-day, health and illness. All of that occurs day to day in the body. And Jesus, or Chiron, is the master, is the way home. I've said to you, Chiron in the spiritual adulting, after you sort of disrupt the criminal from last month, you return home, which is what I try to get clients to do. I bring them through awareness, the strip tease, take you home, and then you decide if you're going to integrate and dethrone your parents and do it differently. That's sort of your choice. So a lot of what you're going to do in practice is awareness to get the client to that space. But if you can really use the service, the day-to-day, the health, the illness, the body, the work environment to teach the client, this archetype is very important. So I also have Venus up there, liminal space I'm going to talk about, is the circle of spirit and the cross of matter. Jesus is the master. Jesus is Chiron, the way home. Jesus, all he did was, and I asked you last week, what makes Jesus ordinary? He's a man. What made him extraordinary? He was divine. And I established that you are Jesus indeed. What your day-to-day is, what your discipleship is, what your cross is, work. At work, you have your cross. That's why Saturn is the cross you bear. Your disciples or the people are the people you work with, the situation, the rules, the structure, all that. He said, give God's what is God, give Caesar's what is Caesar's. He had to pay his taxes just like everybody else. So you do service at work. If you ever get to the agape love of the heart, we're very far from that. But we could do all of that in our workspace. And yet we're always like the daily grind. I'm not valued, 9 to 5. Oh my God, the clock. We're really missing out the opportunity to bring ourselves home. The 48 to 52, which is within the 0 to 100, the rule book, the philosophy of life, the values, the self-worth just for owning ourselves and our voice in our work environment. And then we can eventually, if we do it right, according to astrology, be of service. So there is a myth of Hercules and the Cretan bull. And Hercules has to ride the Cretan bull. The bull in archetypal language and symbology is always matter. It's always the cross of matter right here. That's your body, that's your limitation, that's your Saturn. And Hercules, being the god, so to speak, or the human, is the circle of spirit. You always ride the cross of matter. You ride the desires in the body with the spirit. They're always found together. The second house in astrology, which rules this myth, is the money house. So your money, again, a currency of self-worth. Spirit and matter are always found together. So here I have the circle of spirit and the cross of matter, and I have a little tiny dot called the liminal space. Liminal means threshold. Liminal means a space where God lives. the space between the inhale and the exhale, the 48 to 52. It means transition. When we go to work, we're in a transition space where spirit is there and matter is there. It's an opportunity to do our spiritual work, look at our mind, our thoughts, our judgments. And obviously it's material in nature because it's the clock, it's where we have to spend most of our week, and we get money. So it actually is the most liminal space. And I'll share a little bit more about that in a bit. So Jupiter, I've got Jupiter here, and everybody loves Jupiter. And we will talk about Jupiter this month as the archetype of the CEO, because we're going to dethrone the CEO too, okay? Because we want to dethrone everybody because we want to be on the pedestal. But we use the CEO, which represents the values, which represents the hierarchy, which represents the culture in a work environment to educate us spiritually why we are there. Just like if you're in a relationship. I had a client the other day, 21 years, she's dying to get out of the marriage. I said, 21 years and you haven't learned the reason why you're with this person? You don't want to acknowledge that you're just like that person? What a waste of 21 years. 40 hours of your week, and you don't want to recognize that that culture, that value system, that environment represents something in you? It's a loss that you're taking. We're going to talk about the exit strategy and what my guidance shares with me about the exit strategy when we're trying to leave a job, which is the same thing I work with clients when they want to leave a job or leave a marriage. Don't not extract the essence. So Jupiter, and I've told you about the fat cows and the skinny cows. The fat cows are the years of abundance. So when you get a raise, or when you love your job, or you're on your weekend feeling gluttonous or whatever, you cannot grow spiritually, literally up the ladder of spiritual success without Saturn. Jupiter dethrones Saturn, but every 7 years, as the story indicates, the fat cows are eaten by the skinny cows. This is our work life in a nutshell, this relationship between Jupiter archetype and Saturn archetype. So you cannot have spiritual or material growth without limits, boundary, structure. So going back to our spiritual adulting map, we've got Jupiter and then Saturn. Jupiter is around our 24th birthday. I told you 12 years, 24 years, etc., where we discover spiritual, financial, we're starting to get our paycheck, we're owning that. But if you don't go to work, or you don't save it, or you don't put it in an IRA or whatever it is, it's not going to grow for you. So you cannot grow your money or grow your spirit without a limitation or a container. This idea that we only want more and gluttonous and everything, we would self-destruct, just like Phaeton, just like I told you last week. We would self-destruct. Our fire would burn everything, because we don't have control. Another god I want to share with you is over there, zealous. And you've heard the word zealous, but this is a god, and it's the god of competition. This is what happens at work. Competition is the Aries archetype. It's the archetype of masculinity. It's the archetype of Mars. It's the archetype of more and more and more of ego. The higher I get up the ladder, the more money I make, the bigger the title, then you feel worthy. And that's something that we really, really need to start understanding is not true. Your self-worth is not linked to those things. Those are simply validation needs. So now work serves for safety, security needs, and validation. It's a place of sacred space. So the word zealous comes from the god zealous, and it means to advance, compete with others at work. In the Roman gods, it's the sister envidia. Envidia is the Spanish word for jealousy, envy. And what do? You envy those at work that make more money. You envy those at work that have higher positions. You envy if someone is out sick for the day. You envy if someone has more vacation than you. The workplace is the most sacred space because you're getting confronted with these thieves of your mind, or the deadly sins, or the repus, whatever you want to call them. At all times, you're being confronted with this sort of thing. Okay, so I want to talk to you about this concept of liminality. Liminality, or liminal spaces, okay? So there are two gentlemen that have sort of developed this concept. One is Arnold van Gennep, and the other is Victor Turner. And they made 3 stages of liminality. So liminality is just the space between. It's a threshold. It's a transition space. What they equate it to see the overlap between work and sacred. Whenever you would get initiated into a religion or a tradition or a spiritual foundation, you would have an initiation. Its ceremony and ritual was developed around this. I'm going to initiate you into my religion or my philosophy or my sacred school, or in the Greek culture, there were these mysteries, these sacred schools and mysteries. That is called preliminal. And we know that word, right? Preliminal, the thing you do before something. So preliminal is sort of the beginning, the initiation, right before you start the process. So think of whatever you do the day or two before you start a brand new job. You go shopping, you get your makeup in order, you get what you're gonna wear in order. That's the preliminal. Or today's Tuesday, it feels like Monday because of the holiday, but Sunday you plan for the next day, you set your alarm and things like that. It's a preliminal space. The liminal is the transition. It's the transition between states of being. The reason that Saturn rules work and ambition and all of this is your 30 years of work that you view as separate from your spirit are the transition years to get you ready for what the Vedas say is moksha, the liberation, the prep for your spirit. So when I was talking to someone yesterday, he's like, yeah, I want to do this work. And I said, yeah, get your money, move, get your ranch, get your farm, get your cryptocurrency, all your things in order, then call me and then we'll work on your spirit. And we laughed because it's so silly to think that we have to have all these things in order before we can even look at our spirit, when our spirit is 50% of our life, of what we are. So I'm out to dinner the other night, and my brother-in-law says, oh, I'm going to put you in touch with a friend of mine. She's into that stuff, into that. And I said, what's that? Your spirit? The thing that animates you, that gives you life? But that's how we see it. We see it as woo-woo. It looks weird. It's funny. It's crystals and incense. I'm normal. There's nothing woo-woo about me. To negate 50% of what you are is to live as half a person. And that's what we do because we think it's reserved for the church or the mosque or the ashram or a vacation when we go on a sacred retreat or when we're older. It's not. It's the day to day to day. That's why Jesus, Chiron, the return home, service, self-worth, money, resources, purification, illness, health, all of it, paycheck, is all in the 6th house, the day to day. It's the house of purification. It's sort of where you get polished, if you will, day to day, to then continue on your spiritual journey. This is simply the 6th truth on my spiritual path, which is the truth of purification that has to do with the day to day. And most of us may not realize, but the day to day is eating well, exercising, taking care of the body, sleeping. I'll talk to you later about Ayurveda. Ayurveda has 3 pillars of health: sleep, food, truth. They're all in the 6th house. You need to sleep well, you need to eat well, you need to take care of your body. Not obsessively. If you're doing competitive and I have to win and I have to get the trophy, you're in the earth. But the spiritual you that takes care of your body, makes good choices, takes care of cleanliness, purified, things like that, leads you then to truth. People say, what keeps me up at night? And I say, your lack of truth. So there's two truths on the spiritual journey that you must look at every single day. You have to eat every day and sleep every day and go to the bathroom every day. That's the 6, the day to day. So this, the grind of this, and the first truth, which is your thoughts. You never get rid of those ever, day to day. And you could do that in your day-to-day job, in your day-to-day life, with the day-to-day people that you think aren't sacred. And they become the most sacred of the space. So liminal spaces, so I have in the corner here, before in tribal communities, family, pleasure, work, sacred was all one. It was all one in one community. Everything was play, everything was sacred, everything was family, everything was tradition. Now we've segregated with this agrarian culture that we have. So we think work is separate. So I have there, it's actually the liminal place between your family and your play, or what you deem spirit. It is the threshold. And that glyph of Venus, which is the Cretan bull, which is love, which is Aphrodite Urania, it's in the workspace. It's in the work as a sacred space that you can actually find, quote unquote, God, or the breath, or the pause, or the lesson. So whether or not you decide to work with clients in an IO environment, like in a job, you are going to have clients that the majority are going to come to you with stress. They don't like their job. They hate their schedule. They don't have enough time in the day. How do they get not late to work because they have to take their kids to school? So this is going to help even if you're not an IO psych, just for the understanding what work represents to the mind and body and the spirit. So liminal spaces, and I love this, have one way in and one way out. That's the labyrinth. The labyrinth that I've taught you about, the labyrinth I have in the corner, the labyrinth I tell you to walk with your finger or go somewhere to walk a labyrinth. The labyrinth isn't a maze. Your job isn't a trick. Has one way in and one way out. Many, many years ago, I worked at a job, and there was a lady who told my boss that I took the back door. Anyone who knows anything about me knows that I am as clear, as transparent as it gets. And this lady said, the back door, she used the back door. So my boss, who I know loves and respects me, says to me, hey, you use the back door. And I said, no, I didn't. I happened to park back there. I resigned the next day. I was so intolerant of that criticism. Instead of symbolically seeing what that could be. That same boss brought me back later on for another position, which blew my mind. Best job I ever had. Loved being the dean of nursing. And I learned that humility. I learned that flexibility. I learned, sort of that lesson. But years before. So if we don't take advantage of the opportunity, it doesn't mean that I would have quit any less. But I never extracted the lesson there. That was an opportunity. And that's what we do. We get so offended. And I was young and very immature, and, not that I'm any more mature or anything now, but, I have more age, that when my supervisor says something to me, I can have a dialogue with her and go, oh, well, what's this? What about this? Oh, I see what you're saying. The maturity level is there. But back then at that age, I think I was like 30. I was like, oh, but you accused me of that, I'm quitting. We don't use the opportunity of our relationship, of our children, of our family, of a traffic ticket. We miss it because we don't live symbolically. So this is really, really an opportunity. So the labyrinth has one way in and one way out. It's not trying to trick you. I'm not saying that you don't have shady characters at your job, please, by no means. But remember, if they're shady characters, they're in you. So if you start to learn that these archetypes are just aspects of your own mind, you no longer say, oh, my boss is out to get me, or the lady in the next cubby hates me. You're like, wait a minute, where is me? Where's the judgment? So the client this morning was all about her CEO. When she wrote a whole page, I didn't bring it, whole page of criticisms about the boss. I read them back to her. I go, this is what you think about yourself. This is what you think about yourself. She's like, oh my God. It's the inner dialogue that she has with herself. But when we blame our boss, and we blame our coworkers or the schedule or the paycheck not being big enough, all we're basically saying is, I don't want to listen to my own thoughts. Truth one. So we put it as our work is the grind and we hate it rather than using the opportunity to grow. And lucky people that love their job, lucky people that don't feel that, you know? So liminal spaces are transitions between states of being. When you start off as lead, Saturn, very much in your truth, your rigidity, inflexible, your belief system. Don't tell me I use the back door. And then you transition through work. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to stay in the same job. I just say, don't lose the opportunity to see what that particular job is teaching you, to transition space. Then you transition, you retire. You're a very different person at retirement than you were when you started the job. Saturn made you more supple, softened you, hopefully. Saturn or the work is the midpoint. During a liminal space, it's called an ambiguous space between the rite of passage. When you're in the middle of becoming who you're going to be, that's what work provides for you, a liminal space, a space of transition on your way to becoming what your quote unquote true self, divine being, whatever it is that you want to do in the world. That's why Chiron happens at 48 to 52. 48 to 52 is the age where you start finding your purpose. I get clients at this age all the time. What's my purpose? What's my purpose? What's my purpose? I want to leave my job. I hate my job. It's restricting. And it all started with Uranus, the chaos at 42. The next stage is the return home. And that all happens in the sixth house of service and health and work and illness. And why these things are, unfortunately, we abuse our bodies or we get sick as permission to now find our divine will. But if we use the work environment to do this liminal space, the transition on our way to becoming our purpose, so to speak, we don't have to get sick. So I want to tell you something about thin spaces. And I did an episode on my podcast called Thin Spaces. Thin spaces are known as sacred spaces. It's a Celtic word or a Celtic theme, a Celtic tradition. And it says, thin spaces give meaning to the moments in life where heaven is no longer so far from you. The present moment obtains so much of God's goodness that the space between him and his vast earth becomes widely thin. So if you've ever gone to a church or a sacred site, I did a sacred, forgetting the word, journey, I'll use journey, it's not the word I'm looking for, pilgrimage, many years ago, where I went to Lourdes, I went to Fatima, I went to these very marked spiritual thin places. There's something palpable where you feel God's presence, whatever you deem God, the universe, whatever. People have gone so much there, lit candles, incense, prayed, got water, brought gifts, whatever it is, that you feel it, it's thin. It's like there's no difference between God and self in those spaces. Have you ever gotten to your job before anyone else where the lights are out and it's kind of dark? That's a liminal space. That's a thin space. In architecture and in decorative terms, they use this word liminality or liminal spaces. One of the examples that they use is a shopping mall when everyone's gone and it's dark with just like those little lights. That's God. That's transition. That's the breath. That's in my model child to adult, the pause. The pause is the teenager where you breathe and you say, wait, am I going to go back to child or am I going to make the free will choice to go into adult? That's what your office provides. Your office is a thin space. It is a sacred space. My guides, because I do tend to have a bite, say, Francis, you can bite. Just take a breath before you bite. And me being a glutton, that applies for food too, because I'm just shoveling food in my mouth all the time. Breathe before you take the bite, literally and figuratively. You can tell your boss, I don't agree, or why, but take a breath so that you don't react from child, so you aren't in the fight or flight, so you're not in the angry aggressive, and you're just, but why? I don't understand what you're saying. What is it that you want from me? What are you asking from me? So you can still have your bite, you still can have your STD, say, think, and do to your supervisor. It's not about living in fear and anger and getting mad. Own your power, own your energy, own your space. Ask the question, but in the right tone, understanding that opportunity, that you're having that conversation with that boss, that supervisor, that colleague, is a space where God resides, where you get to choose to not go to child and you choose adult. It's a very powerful thing when you reframe it and you see it this way. All of a sudden, you're not hating the grind. Liminal spaces are absence of light, absence of people. You don't see exactly who you are just yet. So one of the interesting things about the sixth house in astrology is I have the word descendant. It's the line of the descendant. And that line is where the shadow or the sun was setting on your chart the day of your birth. You're on your way to coming out in the light. You're on your way to coming out with your divine will. You're on your way of coming out with your purpose. But the day-to-day grind, whether it's your health, your body, your food, your exercise, your job, your service, whatever it is the way to get there. It's only the Groundhog Day. Another example of liminal space that I love is when you go to the beach where the water and the sand meet. Again, this is where God lives. This is the intersection of family, play, and work. So one of the things I'm inviting clients to do, and I have that on the board here, is, and you might want to consider this, what was your first loss? And what do you see as winning? I like to use the parents just because those are sort of like our gods. Which parent won? Which parent would you say won? And how do you define that as the 100? And when was your first loss? One of the things you're going to see at work is that you're going to define your work experience with those sort of bookends of 0 to 100. And the truth, the 48 to 52, the God or using work to achieve the spiritual success is finding the midpoint. So the liminal space of work is directly linked to who you are becoming and where the sand meets water or the breath. So Jung called this space tenemos. So you know that this is my Vesica Pisces symbol that I use in Truth is in the Triangle. And it's directly related to sacred geometry, my 0 to 100, and the 48 to 52 is the mid-space. Tenemos is a term in Greece that means land dedicated to God. Think of it as like an ashram land or a sacred land or a piece of land. And what Jung said was it's actually what's called a magic circle, the space in therapy where the therapist and the client find God or find that intersection of spirit and matter or individuation, self. And I have here part of the individuation process, which is part of becoming the sun, the Jesus, the master of the solar system, the Sirius in the sky, the things I've shared with you, is disorientation, unraveling, which you have to do. And then at 48 to 52, hopefully you find the way home and you reintegrate your parents. Instead of thinking you're different from them, your value system, you realize that you're just like them. And work is the opportunity that we have. So I want to share something with you from Ayurveda. Ayurveda is, I love Ayurveda. Ayurveda is the medical system of India. And it's such a spiritual practice, even though it's body-based in the sense of diet and herbs, it is a spiritual system. It's sort of that perfect, space between spirit and matter. So there's a thing in Ayurveda where you eat for the seasons. So in the winter and fall, you eat colors that are like the golds and the reds. Think of squash and pumpkin and pomegranates. And then in the spring, you eat more bitter foods like watercress and celery. And if you eat for the seasons, according to Ayurveda, you're healthy. Well, there is a space in between each season that's called Ritu Sandhi. It's the 7, notice the number, 7 days before the season and 7 days after the season. And that's a time for prime illness. So think of skinny cows, 7 years, transition periods, liminal spaces, spirit and matter, meeting God, breath, whatever you want to call it. This is directly linked to the equinox and the solstice. And I told you the law of rhythm for every season, turn. There is a time for you to be calm and quiet. There's a time for you to be raising kids and making money and climbing the ladder. No one's denying that. Saturn rules that. That's why it's the karmic planet. And so the seasons, the equinox and the solstice, that's where Persephone was raped. That's why she's 6 months with her husband in the underworld during the winter solstice, the false equinox and the winter solstice. And then she's with her mom on Earth, which is the spring equinox and the summer solstice. This is the same thing. Give your spirit, spirit, give your matter, matter. Half your day, half your life, half your week, half your month, however you want to sort of segregate that, should be dedicated to spirit and to matter. So I have the 0 to 100, find your 48 to 52. So if it's competition, winning and losing, the midpoint would be indicative of your God space or your tenemos. Spirit and matter, that midpoint is exactly where sort of God lives. It's not all material, lust and envy and greed and gluttony, and it's not all spirit, om, om, om all day. That's nonsense. It's that midpoint. That's the Jesus, the point of spirit and matter, which is exactly why 6th house is service to self first in terms of your spirit. Then, of course, eventually the hope is to give back. But it's your day-to-day, your work, your money, things like that. And I told you competition and play, finding that midpoint. And the Buddha bowl. The story of Buddha walked around, I have Buddha here. Buddha walked around with a bowl begging. Buddha could not get enlightened spirit without feeding the matter, the food, and eating the rice. And what's the Buddha bowl? The Buddha bowl is the 48 to 52. Look at it. It's the fish in Christianity. It's the Buddha bowl. It's a symbolism of service, the hands to give others and to give self. You get fed, I get fed. It's the age of Aquarius. That's what this is all about. This is where we're heading. And then in my model, it's where exactly the triangle of thought meets the square. And you guys know that's my symbol, the squared circle. It's the most metaphysical symbol in my book because it's exactly the intersection. Where you find God is where you look at your thoughts and you see how they materialize in your life. If I use every single person, place, thing, or situation in work to indicate it to my thought that created it and is internalized in my body, every space is sacred. That's the beauty of the intersection of work as a sacred space. I no longer have to see it as the other or the boss or the authority or the castration or the paycheck. It's me. It's all me. That's where we use work for our advantage. So one of the things that happens during the seasons in Ayurveda, something that's called a vata. Vata as a quality is very dry and bitter and windy. Have you ever gone to like a season where it's cold? Your face gets really red and your nails get bitter and dry. Anyone ever been somewhere cold and experienced that? Or even here when it's like, I mean, the one day we have of winter in Florida, it's like, oh my God, it's so cold and everything's dry. Well, what happens is during these seasons, there's a lot of dryness and bitterness in terms of the wind, what's the only thing that can, and you, Keisha, with your Sephora, what's the only thing that can soften your skin if it's dry? What's the only thing that can make your hair moist if it's dry? Oil. Oil. You will go to work and become dry and bitter for 30 years plus, thinking your boss did something to you. Your colleague said something to you. The lady said you're walking out the back door, quitting, hopping from job to job, miserable about your paycheck. At the end of those years, you will get dry and bitter. If you don't have oil, oil is symbolic of love. In Ayurveda, the Sanskrit word for oil is sneha. And the same word means love. You need flexibility. You need supple. You need to bend. When your boss tells you something, you have to sort of get humble, get to your knees. Don't be so rigid. No one's doing anything to you. You're doing it to yourself. It's with that suppleness, with that sneha, that love to the other, knowing that they're you, and eventually, hopefully, love to yourself, and eventually, hopefully, which is the sixth house, service to another, that you will keep from being dry and bitter in between the liminal spaces, in between the spirit and the matter, in between the seasons, in between the 30 years that Saturn says you got the daily grind. That is the only answer. In Ayurveda, there's something called ojas. Ojas is like the essence of life. And we have 8 drops of ojas, of vitality in our heart. If we are bitter and dry and cannot see that that sacred space of work is to sort of make us lead to self-love and self-worth, and then hopefully, like I said, serve another, we become very dry and brittle, like our nails during the winter. And again, we don't have winter, but we all understand. We know that sound of shh when the wind is breaking. It breaks, the ends of your hair, and it's only oil. This very important symbology. You've got to grease the wheels. You've got to soften up. If not, it's that cross. That cross of matter will kill you, and Saturn will beat you down until you learn the lesson. Notice how curvature of Jupiter. Jupiter has the curve. You've got to curve. You've got to soften. You've got to bend. That's the entire purpose of karma. That's the whole purpose of the law of cause and effect. That's the importance of the seasons. And that's what I love about Ayurveda, is that it teaches us that in terms of symbology. So a little bit about astrology. I don't want to talk too much because I shared with you a bit. It is the 6th house. 6th house is ruled by Virgo. Virgo is Chiron. Chiron is the centaur, half matter, half spirit, or half animal, half human. It's literally in the sacred space of work that we become human. We see our animal nature. We see our tendencies. I want to fight. I want the competition. I want to kick him off the ladder, and I want to get his job. We see our greed, our envy, our gluttony. But one of the things I love about the workspace is we're trying in our psyche to keep it like a ritual, like it used to be. My ritual, I meet my friend in the coffee break room, and we have coffee every morning. And you gossip, or you go to the water cooler that it used to be called, and you would chit chat about the weekend. There's some ritual. There's some real beautification in work, in the sense of the ritual of getting together with the people all the time, going to lunch. These are rituals that we maintain at work. And we should get out of our work, self-worth, being productivity, and engage in those rituals. It's part of the way we play while at work. And every single day we are provided, I guess, an hour, half an hour, whatever your job is, to engage in those rituals. So if we look at that, we can really use work as a sacred space. The other reason that the sixth house is health, I told you that health has to do with our body, the truth 6 on the spiritual path, which is we have to eat and take care of our body and sleep every day and nourish our bodies every day. But the thing is, we have taken, especially in our Western culture, that our body has to look a certain way. And if we're not chiseled and skinny and beautiful and curvaceous and gorgeous, then we have no self-worth. So again, it's another place where we beat ourselves up. Work and health. What do? I'm sick to death of working. I got so sick from stress. We tie in work as sickness, blaming authority and structure and limits instead of owning that we're in the exact place we need to be by culture, by vibration, by energy, because we chose that place to learn spiritual lessons. We also outsource our willpower with our health. When we get sick, we are outsourcing our willpower. We're saying that this job is beating me down, is making me sick. No, you have willpower. You have divine will. You're choosing to not show up whole. You're deciding to not show up as yourself. And again, it goes back to Phaeton. He could not ride the chariot. You cannot from day one be given positions of authority and responsibility. You need some time to get seasoned. And oftentimes in resentment or bitterness, you get sick. And I told you last week, illness is narcissistic. I want to believe I'm beyond the body. I'm so divine, I don't need the body. But we do need boundaries. We need a boundary of the body to contain the fire, which is our willpower, which is our will. Because if not, we will self-destruct. And lastly, it's the house of service. But it's got to be genuine service, authentic service. That's when we get to the fourth chakra. That's the Jesus. That's the Aphrodite Urania. Through the cross of matter, through the daily grind, through the day in and day out, then we can develop more of our spirit, our spiritual identity. Then eventually we can serve with authenticity. But if we're lying and wearing masks and blaming everybody at work, we're very, very separate. So I just want to read this to you because I thought it was beautiful. We now separate work as if it's not holy. The fading of liminal stages in exchange for liminoid experiences is marked by the shift in culture from tribal and agrarian to modern and industrial. So where we used to be agriculturally based and everybody did everything on the land or the tribe, that's moved to more of this modern and industrial. And this is somewhat created the separation between sort of work and spirit, if you will. In these societies, work and play are entirely separate, whereas in more archaic societies, they're nearly indistinguishable. In the past, play was interwoven with the nature of work as symbolic gestures and rites in order to promote fertility, abundance, and the passage of certain liminal phases. Thus, work and play are inseparable and often dependent on social rights. Which brings me to this, your loss and your competition. Competition and play. Competition is earth. When you are competing to get to the top of the ladder for more money, for the promotion, that is your earthly desires being satisfied. That is your material. That is self-worth. That is lack of validation needs. You want to get validated with that paycheck, with that title, with that authority, with that special treatment. That is child. So what this statement is saying, it used to be all intertwined. And I always say 80-20, 20% child, 80% adult. But it used to be interwoven. There wasn't any difference between sacred and child and abundance and my role spiritually and materially. But now we're very, very segregated, and we're missing 30-year plus opportunity to grow spiritually. Do you remember when I taught you about the triple goddess? And I said that parents are missing out between 14 and 52 when they have their children. They're missing out. Then they get to me at 52 and say, what has my life been? My kids have left. I don't have a relationship with my spouse. It's the same thing. That era of motherhood in the triple goddess is the same thing as Saturn saying, use the sacred space, use the workspace, use these productive years to be spiritually productive as much as materially productive, the liminal space of spirit and matter. But now we see it as a space that beats us down, that makes us sick, that we're so stressed out and burned out. You hear that all the time, burnout, burnout, burnout. Because you're not taking the essence from the spiritual teaching from work, thinking that it's separate. So one of the things I've been doing with clients is, what is your first loss? Does anyone want to? What was that? No, what do you remember as your first loss in life? So some people have been telling me pets, some people have been telling me when someone died, some people have been saying when they lost a sports game. It's whatever it's whatever the client answers. The client is the one defining loss, but that's a very important question because that's going to be linked to work. Yes. Okay, and that's a perfect answer. The loss, she says, was when she had this, I guess, near-death experience or death experience, and she lost who she used to be. What did I tell you last week about grief versus despair? Grief is when you haven't finished using something. There was a loss associated with what you used to be, that maybe you weren't done using that Maria, but now you went into despair. So when you have a loss at work, loss of a paycheck, loss of the job title, loss of the colleague that got fired, it's an opportunity to go into despair and do deeper spiritual work. So we see a lot of loss associated with work, but what happens in the psyche is we associate our first loss with, of course, the opposite, with is winning. It's the bookends. This is 0 to 100. So if I don't die, if I don't lose, if I'm always on top, if I'm the boss, if I'm the authority, I'm just picking on Maria for a second, then that's your 100. So that's going to create in her psyche, I need to win, I need to win, I need to win, I need to win, in all of us. And you're going to bookend it with that loss. So asking the client what your first loss is gives you an indicator of what they define as winning. I've also been inviting clients to tell me which parent they viewed as the winner and why. Then you can bring the 48 to 52. My first loss was when I told you guys I was kicked out of the Spiritual Monday reunions that were very special. I was the only child. So if I have that as my loss, then my win must become, I have to get back on top spiritually and on top. Well, if I do that, I'm going to self-destruct because I'm not the only spiritual teacher and I'm not the best spiritual teacher. I'm one of a gazillion spiritual teachers. So you get your bookends, and of course that's linked to parents because it always is. Then you can find the intermediary. Play is for your spirit. So if you can learn to play in a sacred space at work, wherever, then you're feeding your spirit, because with play, there's no competing. Competition is the language of the earth. Play is the language of the spirit. Compete your material validation needs. Play, you're having fun. There's no winning in spirit. I hear it all the time. I want to be like you. There's no order of it's constant. You die, you're reborn, you die, you're reborn, you die, you're reborn. There's no winning spirit. So when we understand that, this no longer becomes like a place to get to. And I see this a lot with people that are trying to develop intuitively or be on a spiritual path. There is no end to this. Your spirit doesn't end, your matter ends. And your matter will end fast and furious if you keep just competing, because then you're going to have stress and you're going to have illness. Yes.
So what do you do when something I thought I came back for 7 years later?
That's fine. That's a perfect cycle of Saturn. That is a 7-year cycle.
Like when I came back to life, the doctor said she was dead. And then, you know, I was like, I wasn't me. I wasn't me. I wasn't me. I didn't act like myself.
Well, you died. Something in you died. And that's what Saturn does every 7 years. And that's why it's 7 days or 7 days. It's actually talking about 7 years.
And then in 2019, I came back and I was so much information. I went through cancer, but instead of cancer, it was all psychological. And I was, woo.
Well, but you're new, so you haven't sort of heard the buildup of the 7 years. But every 7 years, we do have a death and a rebirth. They're minor. Saturn cycles are here to teach us how to die. I'm assuming that your death was more Pluto, but all of these were small deaths leading up to I am not that. That's what we're here to learn. We are not our paycheck. We are not our marriage. We are not fill in the blank. Okay, we're not, but they sit on next to the throne to remind us of our limitations. So we're not our parents, but we use them as safety and limits. So I mentioned already, we don't like structure or boundaries, our unmet need of safety, security. Work equals limits equals adult. Work is sacred space. It's already the part of our life that has a rule book, attendance, presence, etc. I mentioned the day-to-day. So these are some of the things I looked up about why people don't like work. 60% of people are unhappy at work. If we help clients shift the perspective that they can grow spiritually, mentally, emotionally at work, that could be a very big impact that you can have on clients. In terms of the thieves of the mind, one of the big ones is sloth. We are actually spiritual sloths, people. We don't give attention to our spirit 48 to 50% of our day or week, a month, or a year, or our lifetime, until we then create illness, destroy the body, blame it on stress of work. We say we got sick and now we're going to do our spiritual work. Nonsense. We're spiritual sloths. Spirit doesn't end. And our psyche wants to compete. Our psyche wants to win. It wants a medal at the end of it. I won at life. You can't win at spirit. There's something called a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is like the representation of Buddha on earth, kind of like being Jesus on earth. A disciple. Use the world, AKA the rice, your job, the limits, the boundary, the rule book to feed you. Don't hide out. Use the temple that is work, the sacred space that is your work life to become the bodhisattva. That's how you use every thought and every situation earthly in the squared circle to heal yourself and to work spiritually. So these are some of the things that I found online. Daily grind, 6th house, day-to-day, health, service, illness, purification. We have an obsession with purification. I work out, I eat, exercise. Again, it's a competition of the body. And the body is simply a sacred vehicle, a sacred vessel to house your fire so you could do your spiritual work. Same metaphor as your work being a sacred temple. Slave to the system. We think we're slaves to the system. Same story at the castration at the moment of conception when you got a body. You feel that anything that limits and restricts you is a slave. But let me tell you that if you didn't have the body, you'd destroy like 5-tone. If you didn't have a structure, you would destroy and burn. Other words, locked into a specific role. We don't want to recognize that the role we have is an exact mirror of the castration and the limitations and the prisoner and the oppressor that we have in our psyche. No one's doing anything to you. Stagnation. Why? Because you think the grass is greener. You think that having a different job or a different title is going to be better. We feel trapped. Again, the limitation oppressor in the mind. Recognition. I love this one. We want recognition, AKA meet my needs. I'm a baby. I'm a child. Tell me I'm great. Validate me, mom and dad, at all times. For doing your job, you need constant recognition for doing your job. Do your job. I'm not saying that you don't deserve a raise. I'm not saying that you don't deserve some recognition at certain times, but this constant thing of praise and accolades, just do your job. I want to keep going upwards, or there's nowhere to go upwards. Competition. There is no hierarchy in the universe. There's no hierarchy in spirituality. This week or next week, I'm going to show you my value system according to my model in terms of the 12 values to be a good boss or to be a good employee or whatever you want to put it, leadership. It's my philosophy around leadership. And it's circular. It's circular. It's being boots on the ground with your employees. It has nothing to do with hierarchy. And the person doesn't feel valued. This is very, very important because it's about self-worth that you're not providing for yourself, but you're getting from the label, the status, the title, or the paycheck. You value yourself independent of. Now, how can we show up at work? We show up at work in the 48 to 52 with a spiritual STD. Model self-worth. Own that. You have permission to be worthy at work and model that to people in a meeting and ask questions and own your power. Not stealing other people's power, but mirroring and modeling that you have self-worth. But the key thing is to let go of the outcome, that you're not looking for praise because you stood up in a meeting, because you're not, yelling at someone in the hallway at work because you're going to get praise. Oh yeah, we all wanted to say that to her. That's nonsense. That's ego. That's the material needs. That's total BS. The spiritual simply shows up and says, I'm worthy. Why? Let me ask a question. I'm going to get my own needs met. But we don't do that in fear, or we think that we have to make it all ostentatious and boisterous. I love Gandhi. Gandhi, by nature, was a lawyer, a narcissist, a total narcissist, as we all are. Someone asked Gandhi if he did everything that he did for love of the other. And his response was not at all. It's all about me. It's the same thing I say. I'm not doing anything for anyone else. I'm doing it for me, for my spiritual growth. If you benefit from that mirror, you benefit from me raping sort of the world with self-love and self-worth, then I've done my job. But I've got to let go of the outcome. The outcome is linked to competition. The outcome is linked to winning and losing, validation needs, your money, your title, your job. If you're still attached to the outcome of what someone says to you at a meeting or says to you after you did a project, then you haven't learned the spiritual lesson in the sacred space that work provides. I love this saying, play better, don't score better. If you're looking at work as a score, a competition of wins and losses, then you're just in the earthly realm. Saturn's going to keep beating you down because you haven't learned. Play better. Be a better team player. Be boots on the ground with your employees. You'll see my theory and my whole, sort of circle of leadership values. I value leadership as a value system. It's one of my values. I loved being the dean of the nursing school. I love being in some capacity a spiritual leader, but it's not that I'm better than, I'm right side by side. That's when you play. That's not when you win and compete. It's a very different mindset. I'm not attached to the outcome. Do I want all my clients to succeed? Do I want them all to integrate and do it differently and take themselves home? Absolutely. But my job as a spiritual teacher, which is what I had to learn from the cult leader, is that I cannot be attached to the outcome. You cannot be attached to your client's outcome. There's a saying I say in therapy, don't work harder than your client. You're working harder than your client, then you're manning your fires and burning them and inhibiting their ability to feed and fly. I mean, not manning your fires because they're taking over the 48 to 52. Yes. Yes.
One is, what about something you're trying to work on the team, but then there's enough respect? Because if there's enough respect, then there's a problem. Because
Lack of respect, what you're defining is internal. And most of the time, when we say someone isn't respecting us, doesn't mean that it's not true in the earthly realm. Remember, there's two states of being. There's the earthly, there's the spiritual. That's why it's the liminal space. Someone actually in the earthly realm may be disrespecting you. And as a therapist, I would explain materially and earthly, that sucks. I had a client text me this weekend, their 2-year-old niece died. That's an earthly problem. You being disrespected at work by your supervisor, totally appropriate, earthly. But we cannot stay in the victim. That's the difference between using work as an earthly space, as a transition, or using it as a sacred space. Where do you disrespect self? Where are you disrespecting yourself that it's coming out? That's the symbol that I have last on the board of the squared circle. What thought in you is, that's the triangle, is creating the square, which is the earthly representation of that person on the team disrespecting you. Does not mean that the earthly is not valid. It means that we've created it because it's still serving us. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Okay, second.
And then I heard yesterday a really nice thing, and it says, no matter how much power a person can have to help someone else, unless that person wants to be helped, you cannot help them
You can't.
because it's called self-will. So in order to be able to help someone, that person needs to authorize you to help them.
That's why I always say, I don't help anybody. I just model a level of self-worth, a self-respect. And if you want that vibration, you too have that authority to take it. You help nobody. This nonsense that we're wounded healers and we help people. No, that symbol of that Chiron is the symbol of the wounded warrior, the wounded healer. And people in his mythology, and you weren't here for that class, I think you should see that because I think you'd like that, is this belief that someone heals you. You heal yourself. That is it. Nobody heals you, but utilize every single opportunity with your colleagues, with your boss, with your everything to use as a lesson to heal self. Then you rape the world. Then you're the Pluto. I know it's harsh language, but we talked about last month. The rape simply means that he took her out of delusion. That's it. He shattered the snow globe. I disrupt people's lives by telling truths. I shatter the snow globe of delusion, but that's it. I can give you tools. I can model the behavior. I'm right by there. I'm the narcissist. I'm greedy. I'm envious. I'm gluttonous. I don't deny those things, but I do work my spirit 24/7 too. Well, 50-50. So it's not 24/7, whatever, 12 and a half hours, you know, side by side, the client. That's why I say don't work harder than your client because it's bull. It's you getting your own need met. I have a doctor. Had a session with her the other day. I said, you're so behind. There's 18 and 20 clients and you're behind and you get home late and you don't see your kid and your boyfriend. You're getting the need met. When you see that client, you have to hug and kiss and have a 20. You're getting your needs met. You're not such a great doctor because it's nonsense. It's nonsense. There's a reason there's boundaries and time limits. 48 to 52, you don't give more or less. I've said it in 100 million ways. Okay, there are two types of power, the covert power and the overt power. And this was from my Truth is in the Triangle relationship classes, but the same thing is here. The unintegrated parent is the one that you need to become more like. So one of the things that Saturn is going to teach you at work, if you're the screamer, the yeller, and the aggressor, Saturn is going to humble you, bend you, soften you, lubricate you to bend a little like the parent that you don't want to be like. I'm very overt. I need to be a little bit more covert. Soften up. It's not manipulation and coercion if you know what you're doing, but just bend. And if you're quiet and sneaky, and like I wrote on the board, the spite, the look that kills, the stink eye, then become more overt. Ask for what you need. Tell your boss or ask your boss why. I don't understand. So this is a perfect opportunity to balance the two powers. Rather than having a power struggle with your supervisor, which is what you're doing internally, bend. Be more subtle, be more supple. That's how you integrate. There's two types of gods. There's the Old Testament God, which was wrath, and everything was like, strike down the person with the sin. And then there was the manipulation or the Jesus or the covert, compassion. You need both. There are appropriate times where you speak up and you ask, and there are other times that you bend and you just bow your head down. That's why Saturn's the cross you bear. That's why it's about death and work and structure. And I have here, death. Something in you needs to die, and you are in that job with those people mirroring to you what needs to change. You keep hopping from job to job to job, just like relationship to relationship. You're looking yourself right in the mirror. You're the problem. Nonsense. Yes. And then I'm wrapping up. I know we're almost out of time.
Absolutely anyone. Therefore, when I ask a question, they get angry instead of answer. And that's just a whole different dilemma. If something's confusing for me, I need to ask. If I don't understand, I need to ask. If something's not okay, I need to ask.
Absolutely. You ask. That's part of the overt power.
When I do, they get so much, it turns pink, purple, they're about to explode, I'm about to have a heart attack. So then I just walk away because I don't want someone to die on my expense. I'm just like,
well, my invitation is, what are you judging? Where do you have it? Step 2. Always go to step 2. Remember, mother, father, your boss, your paycheck, your schedule, your structure, your vaccine, the lighting, whatever you want. Mother, father, every single person, place, thing, or situation, no different at work. Second question, what don't I like about that? So invite yourself to ask, what don't I like about that? You will see a lot. So the good and bad buckets, no different at work. And this goes back to the origin story. So think of the job that you're in. What was the origin story? It goes back to the same model of the 7 gates or the truth is in the triangle. Remember Hephaestus kicked out of Olympus, the first fight, the fantasy of how you met someone? Same thing. You had a fantasy when you got that job. You had a fantasy. You expected you were going to change the world. You were going to get promoted. You were going to have the paycheck so you could buy all your makeup. Some fantasy. Identify the good. Those are the good buckets of that fantasy. The first fight, the first problem is the bad, is the crack in the snow globe. These models all repeat. I don't have any more new information for you. I could just change them to the environment in which we apply. So look at the good, look at the bad. And again, the bad, the things you judge are your buckets, your own shadow. They'll go back to your parents' bad bucket. They'll go back to your own judgments that are confessions, and they'll be linked to your value system. If you're judging something at work that you don't like, the culture, the way that they treat people, so it's linked to a value statement. It's going to help you identify that you don't want to be in that place, or you're being a hypocrite in your own life in that area. And once you check it, then you can leave. But I have exit strategy. All the articles that I read this weekend, because I was planning this lecture this weekend, and of course, no coincidence, this article, I don't know if it was the BBC or the Atlantic, some Forbes, was about the exit strategy. Your exit strategy isn't earthly, people. It's spiritual. That's why Saturn is death. The way you exit a job is linked to what you're attached to, is linked to how you're gonna die. And we're all somewhere afraid of death. That's the grief. Plan your exit strategy from your job. Sure, materially, where are you going? What's your next steps? But it's linked to your spirit. What does your exit strategy, or lack of, do you just on a whim blow up and quit? How is that linked to your earth, your spiritual being? How is that linked to what you don't want to let go of, that you still use? Because Saturn is a utility. Remember, I told you that. That's your grief. Link these together. This is not a job. This is a sacred space for you to do 30 years of spiritual work, just like your kids are your unintegrated shadow, just like your partner is your mirror. Don't miss out on these earthly, quote unquote, experiences thinking that they're material and not spiritual. It's nonsense. Part of the exit strategy that you're trying to get is from your power currency. If you are overt, blatant, aggressive in your life the way I am, my guides say, Francis, breathe before you bite. The breath is the covert. The breath is the humility. If you're more passive aggressive, subtle, under your breath, stink eye, then speak up. One of the things I love about that movie, Bruce Almighty, God took a break. God gave Bruce the responsibility. Even God took a break. The wrathful God gave it to Jesus. Everyone needs a break. If you ever saw the show Lucifer, Morgan Freeman plays God. He wants to retire. Retire from your narcissism. Let Saturn take over and teach you. If you have too much covert power at work, you have magical thinking, you don't take personal responsibility, and you blame and you think it's everybody's fault. If you're like me and you have overt power at work, then you take too much responsibility. Everything's your fault, the shame and blame. I always go to shame and blame. So I'm going to wrap up. I just want to use a few more sort of symbolic metaphysical things. I told you about the oil, the sneha. In shamanism, I've told you, the shaman walked the worlds, the spiritual identity, the material identity. I'm here as an earthly teacher, but I'm connected to universal consciousness, getting teachings for when I plan a lecture. So you get both states of being, and that's what you want to be in this session with your client. That's what Jung was talking about with Tenemos in the magic circle. A lot of times therapists and clients will feel that time stretches when they've gotten to some level of analysis that's changing. So this exists, walking between the worlds or the two states of beings, which is shamanism. And you know what we do in shamanism? In shamanism, we make a fire. Fire is like sort of the center of ceremony. And we make the fire friendly and we add oil. It's about the suppleness. It's about taming the fires. We all know that you're God. We all know you're divine. If you're playing small, covert, popper, build the fire. Make it friendly, add oil, it'll grow. If you're uber narcissistic and you're burning like Phaeton through everything, fast and furious, then tame the fire. Man your fires, your third chakra. The other thing is dot. In Kabbalah, dot is on the tree of life. There's 10 Sephiros circles. They're divine emanations of God. I told you last time about understanding and knowledge and wisdom. Dot is the one that all 10 emanate from. You've got to sort of emanate all of it. From there, that space, that liminal space, that sacred space of dot on the tree of life, emanate all aspects of God. And you do that at work. You use the space where you go every day, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, to emanate not only your material values and material self, but your spiritual self too. Any questions before I take attendance? I'm going to stop recording.